Hello, it's Stuart Crawford again, and welcome back to part two of Russia is now a colony with China with my guest, Frederick Lauritsen.
The Russians now find themselves without the 32 million hectares of Ukraine, but without the ones in the Far East either.
So, hoist by their own petard in many
Well,
ways.
yes, but the Chinese are probably rather pleased about the
I'll, bet.
situation.
I'll bet. I'll bet.
I think this is absolutely huge. This is a very, very big thing for the Russians and the Chinese, actually. So it's at a scale that I think I'm actually surprised it hasn't it been more of a headline. It's a very big event. The thing is that reading the speeches and the agreements, because I looked through some of them, the ones that are publicly available.
And also, how do you see the next 12 years, as you said, the deal will last? How do you see that panning out?
Yes, well, the Russia, I think, is now considering that China is the only option it has in order to have access to the rest of the world. It needs China as an ally, and it needs Chinese support in order to continue as a viable country. There's also in the background there's the lingering fear that local tensions might create conflict within the Russian Federation. So they probably think that the Chinese are against that and they want to keep the Russian Federation intact to have this direct access to the West we mentioned. So the contract is rather short, it's 12 years, but I think is not because of a Russian desire, but because of a Chinese one to reconsider where they will be in 10, 12, 15 years' time. Honestly, I wouldn't think that the Chinese and the Russians are uh, apt to go to war with each other. The Chinese, I think, ironically, will always prefer diplomacy to conflict. It's one of those strange Chinese traditions. They just a bit like the Indians. They like the idea of solving problems rather than moving them to a higher level. So I don't think they're looking for conflict with Russia. The only thing that could generate a conflict is if there were internal strife in the Russian Federation. And the only way to avoid that is with a regime change. They need to change who's at the top in Moscow.
If so, might they go about delivering that?
I think that now there are two reasons for the regime change from a Chinese perspective. This new agreement means that China is not only investing economically in Russia, but it starts to be exposed politically to the workings within Russia. They have to make sure that the political agreements, the economic agreements, go correctly according to politics. So there's no hiccup. The other thing is that there's this park outside Minsk called the Stone Park, Kamensky Park, which is just a few kilometers outside, where the Chinese have negotiated with the Belarusian government a special visa-free status for Chinese workers. Effectively, they can go there for 6 months and work without paying taxes, without being resident. It's a bit of China outside Minsk.
Oh, very interesting.
So the reason, and a lot of high-tech companies are there. One could think of the phone producer Huawei, for example. So clearly, the idea is to have, again, the example of the telephone. That's just easier to understand, I think. You could have uh, a lot of cell phones in outside Minsk that then need to be sold to Poland, Germany, France, Spain. But to get them across the border has to be open. So the Chinese are investing in Belarus with the idea that there will be free trade of some sort.
How very interesting. How very scheming of them.
Yep, but that unfortunately goes against what the Russians are doing at the moment.
Yeah.
Because at the moment they have a blockade, effectively. They have an embargo against them, and the borders are closed. I mean, one can think the Baltic states, I think, have entirely closed their borders. Poland as well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just really, it's very complicated to cross
Well,
those
there
borders
is
in
in
the
effect
west.
a sort of a new Iron Curtain. Really, it's just
Yes,
200 kilometers further east than the old one used to be.
exactly. But I'm not. I don't think that the Chinese are interested in that.
Okay.
Europe is too far, and it's only interesting as a consumer market.
Frederick, do you think that looking at the overall situation, that it suits China to have the current Russian regime under Putin, which is a known, if you like, rather than the unknown, I guess, of whatever might come along and replace it, if indeed that is to happen?
Yes, I think that at the moment the Chinese are very happy that Putin is in power because they understand his language, they understand how he grew up. There's an element where the fact that he grew up in the Soviet Union means that he actually can speak a language they can understand. The question is the key element will be when the Chinese think it's more important to have an open border between Belarus and Poland than to have someone they can talk to. So that
When,
once the economic balance tips, the Chinese will feel obliged to replace the leading figures in the Russian Federation with uh, people who probably have individually less power. Ironically, they might be more interested in a slightly more democratic and more, how do you say, a greater delegation of power, maybe even on a regional basis.
but what I want to know is there any concrete evidence that China is sending weaponry and ammunition and supplies to Russia?
And I don't know about concrete evidence, to be honest. I've heard about it, and we've obviously heard about the potential of rather than direct Chinese supplies coming from North Korea.
Yes, I've
Also
written about yeah.
of soldiers, which may be an interesting move from the Chinese. The Chinese might be very happy to have lots of weapons leave North Korea, including lots of soldiers. The Chinese and North Koreans, if I'm not mistaken, have a number of disputes, political, cultural, and military. They don't really get on that well. So again, thinking about the economic side, the Chinese would probably be interested in having a port access of Ukraine for the goods of the Road and Belt Initiative. They probably were originally thinking of Odessa, because Odessa is connected by train lines. So the Chinese are supporting the Russian effort, but as a proxy war to weaken Russia in order to make sure that they can control the regime. So I would say that the Chinese are not necessarily acting against Ukraine or the West specifically. They're just interested in weakening the players.
Okay, that's very interesting because I wrote a piece a few days ago on North Korea supplying particularly ammunition to Russia via, they have a sort of shuttle of 5 ships going between one of the North Korean ports and one of the Russian Far Eastern ports, and they're just putting container loads of ammunition over, because both armies use the same calibers of ammunition, which of course the West does not. But it's very interesting. No one has ever directly accused China of supplying arms to Russia, but there's always been that sort of rumor, and it's nice that you're able to comment on that and say not concrete evidence yet, but who knows. Just continuing with the military theme, if I can, and going off at a complete tangent. One of the other points of tension, which involves China, one of the many points of tension, it obviously involves Taiwan. And I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts on how the sort of China oblique Taiwan confrontation, if I can call it that, might pan out in the next 10, 20 years?
That is, if I'm not mistaken, within Taiwan itself, there are divided opinions about the relation with China. Well, Taiwanese themselves, some of them want a rapprochement and others don't. So it seems to be a complicated matter internally in Taiwan as well. Clearly, there's a military aspect which is in some ways external to Taiwan and China. So the countries like Japan and Korea, even Australia and the US are probably very concerned about all this. But I think what it spells out, rather than a territorial acquisition, it has become a justification for strengthening. This, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but the naval capabilities, and I think specifically submarines, have become more important for everyone.
The deal with the US, UK, Australia submarine deal, I think is indicative of that, as is Britain's acquisition of two very modern aircraft carriers, which the rest of the world and the rest of the British services outside the Navy say, well, what do we need those for? And I think it's quite clear that one of the reasons we need the aircraft carriers is so that we can at least contribute to anything that happens around the South China Sea, and obviously in conjunction with our US and Japanese and Philippine and Australian allies in that position, part of the country. But that, again, that's extremely interesting. Tell me about the website that you run, and what is it there for? What's its purpose?
Yes, the website is called kallipolis.co.uk. So that's KALLIPOLIS.co.uk. And it focuses on giving explanations to current geopolitical problems based on comparison with the past. So we look at history to explain what's going on today. History doesn't always explain every phenomenon, that's clear, but there are some things which are easier to understand if one looks further in the past. It gives sometimes also the possibility to understand the automatic reaction that some countries have. They'll sometimes react on the basis of their own past in a way that we think is sometimes eccentric, because it's not our own past, it's theirs. So this is very important. We provide services. So if someone needs to have a white paper commissioned for research on specific topics, which can be larger or smaller in countries. Mainly we focus on North Africa, the Middle East, part of the Balkans, and India and China, and Central Asia. Again, with this idea of explaining some cultural phenomena and also current events. They can just contact us directly on the website, and we can organize something.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure lots of people will. Freddie, that's been absolutely fascinating, and thank you for your time joining us today. I consider myself much better informed and much better educated, thanks to your input and answering our questions so well. And I'm sure that our audience will feel the same way. So it just remains for me to say, Frederick Lauritsen, thank you very, very much for joining us on this podcast. And I look forward to speaking to you again at some point in the future. Many thanks.